The day fear ruled. The valley of Tharvis had once been alive. Not merely inhabited, but alive. It breathed in the mornings, when golden mist rose from the river and curled between the low hills like a whisper reluctant to leave. It laughed in the afternoons when merchants filled the square with bright cloth and louder voices, bartering and boasting as though coin were only half the reason they gathered. And at night it glowed, lanterns swaying gently outside wooden homes, firelight flickering through windows, music threading through the cool air as families shared stories beneath the stars. It had been a place where time softened, where travelers stayed longer than they intended, where even the harshest winters seemed to hesitate at the valley's edge, as though something unseen but undeniable kept them at bay. The people had never fully understood why. They only knew that life here was kinder, easier, safer. And though few spoke of it openly, though fewer still would admit it aloud, they all knew the truth. The dragons had chosen this place. High above the valley, carved into the stone spine of the surrounding mountains, lay their domain. Vast caverns warmed by ancient fire, hidden from sight but never from presence. On clear days, one might catch a glimpse of vast wings cutting across the sky, scales glinting like living stars. And yet, the dragons never descended upon the valley in wrath. They did not hunt its livestock. They did not burn its fields. They did not claim tributes. They simply existed. And in their existence, the valley prospered. Storms broke upon unseen barriers before they could reach the crops. Predators avoided the land entirely. Even the rivers ran steadier, as though guided by a force older than the mountains themselves. It was not protection given, not in any spoken agreement, but it was protection nonetheless. And for generations, an unspoken understanding held. The dragons would remain. The humans would not interfere. A balance, a fragile piece, until the day fear found its voice. It began as such things often did far from Tharvis. In distant lands, stories had begun to change. Whispers of dragon attacks, of villages reduced to ash, of travelers vanishing beneath shadowed skies. Whether truth or rumor none could say, but fear does not wait for certainty. Fear grows in the telling. And by the time it reached the valley, it was no longer a whisper. It was a warning. They will turn, said merchants arriving from afar. They always do. They grow stronger, said wandering soldiers, their armor marked with battles no one in Tharvis had seen. And when they do, they claim what they believe is theirs. They are not guardians, said the mages, they are waiting. Waiting? The word spread like rot beneath the surface. Waiting for what? For when? For whom? No one could answer. But the question alone was enough. Because once doubt takes root, even the strongest trust begins to fracture. Then came the fire. It was not the valley. Not yet. It was a settlement beyond the eastern ridge, a place few in Tharvis had ever seen, but whose traders had once passed through their markets. The sky had burned that night. Witnesses spoke of a shadow vast enough to blot out the stars, of flames that turned stone to glass, of a roar that shook the earth itself. When the survivors arrived, those few who did, they carried nothing but ash and terror. It was a dragon, they said. And that was enough. It did not matter that no one in Tharvis had ever been harmed. It did not matter that their skis had remained clear. It did not matter that the dragons above them had never once descended in anger. Fear does not care for nuance. Fear demands action. The army arrived at dawn. They came in disciplined silence, banners snapping in the cold wind, armor gleaming like a promise of order in a world slipping toward chaos. Knights led the formation, their polished silver reflecting the pale light of morning. Behind them marched mages, their robes heavy with enchantments, staffs humming faintly with restrained power. Hunters flanked the edges, their eyes sharp, their weapons designed not merely to wound, but to end. They did not ask permission. They did not seek counsel. They arrived with purpose already decided. The valley watched. Doors remained half open, windows cracked just enough for unseen eyes to peer through. No one greeted the army. But no one opposed them either. Because the army brought something the valley no longer had. Certainty. The climb to the dragon's resting place was steep. The air grew thinner, colder. And quieter. Not the natural quiet of mountain heights, but something heavier. Something that pressed against the ears and settled into the chest. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. or after devastation. When they reached the clearing, they found her. The matriarch, Valira. She lay at the center of the stone plateau, her immense form curled inward, not in dominance but in protection. Even wounded, she was vast. Her body was a fortress of scale and muscle, each plate once gleaming with molten gold now dulled by soot and streaked with darkened blood. Her wings, torn along their edges, lay half-folded around her like broken shields. One limb bore deep scoring, the flesh beneath exposed where something had struck with terrible force. And yet, she had not fled. She had not abandoned her ground. Because within the shelter of her body, 3 hatchlings trembled. Small by comparison, fragile, their scales had not yet hardened into the brilliance of their kind. Their wings were little more than folded membranes, too weak to carry them, too delicate to protect. They pressed close to her, instinct driving them toward the only safety they knew. And she endured. For them, the army spread out in a careful arc. Weapons raised, spells prepared, every movement measured, controlled. Because even wounded, a dragon was still a dragon. The villagers gathered behind them. Slowly, hesitantly, drawn by fear, drawn by the need to witness what came next. They stood at a distance, a living wall of uncertainty, faces pale, hands clenched, eyes wide with a mixture of dread and something far more complicated. Memory, because they recognized her, not as a monster, but as a presence, a constant. She had been part of their lives for as long as any could remember. A shadow in the sky, a warmth in the winters, a silence that kept worse things away. And now, she lay broken before them. And the command cut through the air like a blade. The commander stepped forward, his expression set in stone, his voice steady, but not unfeeling. Before they grow, he did not shout. He did not rage. He spoke with the calm certainty of a man who believed himself necessary. Behind him, the knights shifted. Not eagerly, but obediently. Because duty does not require comfort. Only actions. They'll burn us all one day, someone whispered. The words were quiet, but they carried. They always do. Another voice joined. Then another. Fear finding echo in fear. They're only waitings. Better now than later. We can't risk it. The murmurs grew. Not loud, but persistent. Like water wearing away stones. Each voice alone might have faltered. Together, they became conviction. Valira lifted her head. The movement was slow, painful, every motion a visible strain against wounds not yet healed. But she raised it nonetheless. Not in threat, not in defiance, in acknowledgement. Her eyes opened fully. Gold, deep and ancient. They moved over the crowd, over the soldiers, over the villagers, and in them, there was no rage, no fury, no hunger for vengeance. There was something far heavier, something that settled into the bones of those who met her gaze. Understanding. She knew. She understood what they had decided, what they believed, what they feared. She understood, and she did not fight it. That was what broke them. Not her strength, not her size, but her acceptance, because it forced them to see themselves clearly. Not as defenders, not as heroes, but as executioners. The knights advanced. One step, then another. Boots against stone, metal against silence. The sound carried, measured, unavoidable, and behind them, the villagers stepped back. Not in unison, not by command, but instinctively, as though distance might absolve them of what was about to happen. They retreated from the front, from the decision, from responsibility. Each step a quiet surrender, each movement a silent agreement. This must be done, and we will not stop it. Every merchant who had traded beneath her shadow stepped back. Every farmer whose fields had flourished under unseen protection stepped back. Every child who had once pointed to the sky in awe stepped back. They all moved. All chose distance. All chose safety. All chose fear. All but ones. At the very edge of the crowd, where hesitation still lingered, where certainty had not yet hardened into action, stood a single figure. A human's. Young. Unarmored. Unremarkable. No gleaming weapon at his side. No sigil marking rank or allegiance. No power that could challenge what stood before him. He was, by every measure, insignificant. And he did not move. The commander saw him. Not at first, but eventually, because stillness draws the eye in a world of motion. You. The word was sharp. Directed. Final. Move aside. The young man did not flinch. Did not look away. Did not step back. He simply stood. As though the command had not been given. As though the moment did not demand his obedience. The commander's brow furrowed. Not in anger. In confusion. Because defiance in such a moment was not expected. Not from soldiers. Not from villagers. And certainly not from someone like him. You would stand for them, the commander asked. The young man's answer was simple. He shook his head. Once. Slowly. No. The word was quiet. Almost gentle. And yet, it carried. Across the clearing. Through the ranks of soldiers. Into the hearts of those who listened. It was not shouted. It was not forced. But it stopped everything. Because it was not just refusal. It was rejection. Of fear. Of certainty. Of the path already chosen. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not loud. Not visible. But felt. Confusion. Disbelief. Something dangerously close to hope. The commander studied him. More carefully now. You would oppose us. The young man stepped forward. Not away. Forward. The movement was small. Barely a step. But it shattered the fragile balance of the moment. Because no one had expected that. They never harmed us, he said. His voice was steady. Not loud, but unwavering. Not once. They are dragons, the commander replied, sharper now. That is enough. The young man met his gaze. And did not yield. No, he said quietly. Fear is not a crime. Silence fell. Deeper than before. Heavier. Because something had changed. Not in the dragons. Not in the armies. But in the space between them. And then, without permission, without protection, without certainty, the young man walked forward. Past the line of soldiers. Past the weight of expectation. Past the fear that held everyone else in place. Toward the dragons. And in that moment, the world held its breath. The choice that changed everything. The air changed the moment he stepped forward. It was not the kind of change that could be seen. No storm gathered, no wind rose, no sudden flash of magic tore across the sky. And yet, something shifted. Something subtle but undeniable. The kind of shift that exists not in the world itself, but in the fragile space between decision and consequence. The young man took another step. Stone scraped faintly beneath his boots, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence that surrounded him. Behind him, hundreds watched. Before him, a dragon lay wounded, her vast body coiled around the last fragile remnants of her bloodline. Between them, an invisible line, drawn not by blade or spell but by fear. And he had just crossed it. The air grew heavier. Not with weight, but with tension. Magic coiled, unseen but present, thickening the atmosphere like a storm waiting for release. It hummed faintly along the edges of perception, a low, vibrating pressure that settled into bone and breath alike. The mages felt it first. Their fingers tightened around their staffs. Runes etched into ancient wood flickered softly, responding to the rising tension. Spells gathered, half-formed, held at the brink of completion. Ready. Waiting. The knights reacted next. Shields lifted, metal catching the light. Blades angled forward, their edges gleaming with intent. Their formation shifted almost imperceptibly, tightening, closing ranks. Prepared. Just in case. The hunters were the quietest. They moved like shadows at the edges, bows drawn but not released, arrows tipped with enchantments designed to pierce scale and sinew alike. Their eyes tracked the young man's. Not the dragon's. Not the threat. Him. Because in that moment, he had become the unknown's. Stop him. The whisper came from somewhere within the ranks. Soft, urgent, barely a breath. And yet, it carried. Because everyone was thinking the same thing. This was wrong. Not dangerous. Not foolish. Not even reckless. Wrong. As though something unseen and fragile stood balanced on the edge of a blade, and any interference would send it crashing down. But no one moved. Not a single soldier stepped forward. Not a single mage released their spell. Not a single hunter loosed their arrow. Because something deeper than training held them still. Something older than command. Instinct. Not the instinct to fight, but the instinct to witness. The young man walked on. Each step measured. Not slow enough to suggest hesitation. Not fast enough to suggest urgency. Simply, deliberate. He did not look back. Did not check if anyone followed. Did not seek approval or reassurance. Because there was none to give. This path, he walked it alone. Valera watched him. Her breath came shallow. Each inhale a visible strain, each exhale a low, rumbling sound that echoed faintly across the stone. Pain radiated through her body. From torn wings that could no longer lift her skyward. From wounds carved deep into scale and flesh alike. From exhaustion that weighed heavier than any injury. But beneath the pains, something else stirred. Awareness. Her gaze fixed upon the approaching human. Small, fragile, insignificant. By all measures that mattered in the ancient world she had known. He was nothing. And yet, he walked forward. Not as prey. Not as threat. But as something she did not understand. The hatchlings felt it. Fear. Not learned. Not reasoned. But instinctive. Raw. Immediate. They pressed closer to her side, small bodies trembling, wings twitching in weak defensive motions. Soft hisses escaped them, not the roar of their kind, but the uncertain warning of creatures who knew danger but not how to face it. Their eyes bright, untested, locked onto the human. They had never seen one so close. Never felt one approach without the scent of violence. And they did not know what to do. Valera did. Or at least, she thought she did. She shifted just slightly. Not enough to alarm. Not enough to provoke. But enough to place herself more fully between the human and her young. A shield. Even broken. Still a shield. The young man stopped. A few paces away. Close enough to feel the heat of her breath. Close enough to see the fine details of her scales. The cracks, the scars, the places where life had carved its marks into her. Close enough to die. If she chose. Behind him, tension snapped tighter. Weapons lifted higher. Spells brightened. Arrows steadied. Because this was the moment. The point of no return. If the dragon struck, there would be no hesitation. No mercy. No doubt. But he did not reach for a weapon. Because he had none. He did not raise his voice. Because there was nothing to command. He did not prepare to defend himself. Because he knew. He could not. Instead, he knelt. The motion was simple. Unforced. One knee to stone. Then the other. His posture lowered. His gaze softened. His hands remained visible, empty, open. The gesture shattered expectation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Not loud, not unified, but unmistakable. Confusion. Disbelief. Because this was not how one faced a dragon. This was not how one survived. I'm not here to hurt you. His voice was quiet, carried not by force, but by stillness. The words were absurd, meaningless, almost laughable. He was human. They were dragons. There was no shared language, no common ground, no reasons for those words to matter. And yet, they did. Valera stilled. Not completely. Pain still moved through her. Breath still came uneven. But something within her paused. Her great head lowered. Slowly, carefully, each movement deliberate, measured, controlled. Because even now, she was aware of the army, of the weapons, of the fragile line that held everything together. Her eye came level with him's. Massive, golden, ancient. It reflected him entirely, his form small within its vast surface. Fragile, ephemeral, temporary. They studied each other. He saw power, age, endurance, a being shaped by centuries, perhaps longer. A creature who had seen the rise and fall of things he could not even imagine. And yet, he also saw pain, exhaustion, a quiet, unyielding determination to protect. She saw something else, a creature raised on fear. She knew his kind, knew their history, knew their patterns. They feared what they could not control, destroyed what they could not understand. And yet, he knelt, and between them, something formed. Not trust, not yet. Something smaller, something more fragile. A moment, a possibility, a choice. The young man moved. Slowly, carefully, his hand drifted toward his satchel. Behind him, chaos tightened. The hunters reacted first. Arrows drew back, strings taut, ready to release at the slightest sign of threat. The knights shifted, shields rising, blades angling forward. The mages were the most dangerous. Their spells surged, power building, coiling tighter, brighter, ready to be unleashed in an instant. Wait, someone began. Too late. His hand slipped into the satchel. 100 hearts stopped. And then, he withdrew it. Not with a weapons, not with a blade or charm or hidden spell, but with something small, simple, unremarkable, a water skin. The tension did not break. Not immediately, because disbelief is slower than fear. He placed it on the ground, gently, carefully, as though the act itself required precision. Then, he slid it forward, across the stone, toward her. You're hurt. The words were soft, almost a whisper. Silence answered. The kind of silence that does not merely fill space, but defines it. The army did not move. The villagers did not speak. Even the wind seemed to hold itself still. Nothing happened. Time stretched. 1 heartbeat. 2, 10, 100. And then, movement. Not from the dragons. From the smallest of the hatchlings. It stirred. Tentatively. Its body trembling as it shifted, tiny claws scraping lightly against the stone. The sound was faint, but in the silence, it was deafening. Its head lifted, tilted, curious, afraid. Valera tensed. Every muscle in her body tightened. Not in preparation to strike, but in restraint. Because instinct screamed at her to stop it, to pull it back, to protect. But she did not move. Because something deeper than instinct held her still. The hatchling took a step. Unsteady, clumsy, its legs not yet fully certain beneath it. Another, Its wings twitched half-spread as though ready to flee. But it did not. It moved toward the water skin. The distance was small, but it felt immeasurable. The crowd held its breaths. Because this was the moment. The hatchling reached it. It paused, its head lowered. It sniffed, and then it drank. The sound was soft, almost delicate. The quiet pull of waters, and it echoed across the valley like thunder. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Not loud, but undeniable. Because the impossible had just happened. Predator had accepted offering. Fear had not been answered with violence. A line that had existed for generations had been crossed, and nothing had broken. The young man smiled. Not wide, not triumphant, just relieved. That's it, he murmured. Valera's gaze never left him. Something stirred behind her eyes. Deep, ancient, buried beneath instinct and memory and the long weight of survival. Not trust, not yet, but recognition of something she had not seen in a very long time. Joyce. Behind them, the army shifted. This is madness, one of the mages whispered. Or proof, another replied. The words hung in the air, unanswered, because neither was wrong. The commander watched, his jaw tight, his expression controlled. But something in his gaze had changed. Uncertainty. He stepped forward, not toward the dragons, but toward understanding. Stand down. The command was clear. Firm, measured. No one moved. Not out of defiance, but because the moment had already slipped beyond command. Stand down, he repeated. Louder now. Sharper. Still, no one moved. Because the line had already been crossed. Not by force, not by powers, not by decree, but by one humans, who had chosen to step forward. And nothing would ever be the same again. The bond no one expected. The days that followed did not feel like history in the making. There were no proclamations, no celebrations, no sudden transformation that turned fear into faith overnight. Instead, there was uncertainty, lingering, quiet, fragile, because while a single moment can change the direction of a story, it does not erase everything that came before it. Fear once rooted does not vanish. It loosens, it weakens, but it lingers in the spaces between thought and instinct. Waiting, watching, ready to return. And yet, something had changed. Something subtle. Something that could not be undone. The young man stayed. He did not leave with the armies. He did not retreat with the villagers. He did not return to the safety of distance or the comfort of normalcy. Instead, he remained. His name, they would learn, was Aaron. Not a soldier, not a mage, not a man of influence or importance. He held no rank, carried no title, owned nothing of value beyond what little he could carry. And yet, he had done what none of them had dared. He had stepped forward, and now, he stayed where that step had taken him. The first morning came quietly. The valley woke not to the clamor of routine but to a hesitant stillness. Doors opened slowly, voices remained low, eyes turned almost instinctively toward the mountain's edge. Toward the place where the impossible had occurred. Where a dragon still lived. Where a human still remained. Aaron returned. He walked the same path as before. Up the same winding trail. Across the same stone where fear had once held an army frozen in place. But now, there were no soldiers waiting. No weapons raised. No spells gathering. Only silence. And watchful distance. He carried water. The same water skin refilled. Another slung across his shoulder. Heavy, unbalanced, but necessary. He approached slowly, not because he feared her, though he did, not because he expected violence, though he knew it was possible, but because he understood something now. Trust was not given. It was built. Valera watched him. She was awake this time, not merely aware, not merely enduring. Watching, her breathing was steadier, still labored but less strained. The deep wounds along her side had begun to close, the raw edges no longer fresh with blood. Her wings remained torn, but the rigid stillness that had held them before had softened. Healing, slow, incomplete, but undeniable. Her eyes followed him, not with resignation, not with acceptance, but with something far more complex. Caution, measured, deliberate. The gaze of a creature who had lived long enough to know that one moment did not define all that followed. Aaron stopped at the same distance as before. Not closer, not farther. The same. Consistency mattered. He knelt again. The same motion. The same posture. The same offering. Water. He placed it on the ground, slid it forward, and waited. The hatchlings reacted first. They remembered. Not clearly, not with understanding, but with instinct shaped by the day before. The smallest moved again, less hesitant this time, still cautious but curious. It approached, sniffed, drank. The others followed. Valera did not stop them. She watched, and when Aaron reached for his satchel again, she did not tense. Not the way she had before. That was the first change. Small, almost invisible, but real. The days passed. Aaron returned each morning, always with something. Water, food, cloth for bandages. The food was simple. Scraps mostly. What he could gather. What he could spare. What he could steal, because the army had not fully left. They had withdrawn, pulled back from the clearings, established camp at the valley's edge. Waiting, watching, debating, they did not advance. But neither did they abandon their purpose entirely. And so, Aaron took what they would not miss. Bandages, medicinal salves, water, not out of defiance, but necessity, because no one else would. At first, the valley watched from afar. They gathered at a distance, careful not to approach too closely. They stood where they could see but not be seen, where they could witness but not participate. They watched the human who should have died, the dragon who should have killed, the hatchlings who should have fled. And they waited. For the moment it would fall apart. For the inevitable return of fear. For the reminders that they had been right all along. But it did not come. Instead, they saw something else. They saw Aaron kneel each morning. They saw the hatchlings greet him. They saw Valera. Not strike, not roar, not drive him away. They saw her endure his presence. Then accept it. And slowly, very slowly, something within them began to shift. They stepped closer. Not all at once. Not together. But one by one. A farmer, standing a little nearer than the day before. A merchant, lingering longer than necessary. A child, taking a step forward, before being pulled back by cautious hands. Then, another step, and another, until distance no longer felt like safety, and proximity no longer felt like danger. And then, they stopped watching, because there was nothing left to confirm their fear. Only something that challenged it. And that was far harder to face. Valera healed. Slowly, her strength returned in increments too small to notice day by day, but impossible to deny over time. Her breathing deepened. Her movements grew steadier. The tremor that once ran through her limbs faded. Her wings, though still torn, shifted, stretched, tested, not ready, not yet, but closer. Her scales began to regain their brilliance, the dullness of injury fading beneath the slow work of recovery. Gold returned, not as it had been, but as it would be again. And yet, the most significant change was not physical. It was in the way she watched. Before, her gaze had been distant, resigned, the look of a creature who expected nothing, and therefore could not be disappointed. No, it was different. Focused, she watched the humans, not as threats, not as enemies, but as variables, unknowns, uncertain, possible. She measured them, their movements, their distance, their choices. She learned, and always, she watched Aaron differently, because he did not behave as the others did. He did not keep his distance. He did not avoid her gaze. He did not act as though she were something to be endured or escaped. He simply remained present, consistent, and in a world defined by instinct and survival. Consistency meant something. It meant predictability, and predictability was the first step toward trust. The hatchlings adored him. There was no hesitation in them, no restraint, no memory of what had come before. To them, he was not human. He was safe. They followed him, at first cautiously, small steps, short distances. Then, without restraint, they stumbled after him across the stone, claws clicking unevenly. Their wings flapped awkwardly, uncoordinated but enthusiastic. They nudged him, pulled at his clothes, chirped loudly when he delayed. Demanding, curious, alive, he laughed, not the quiet, restrained sound of politeness, but genuine, unburdened, the kind of laughter that had no place in a valley ruled by fear. And for the first time in weeks, the valley heard joy. It was unfamiliar, but it was welcome. Time passed, not marked by days, but by change, by the absence of fear where it had once been constant, by the presence of something new, something fragile, something worth protecting. One evening, the sun dipped low. The sky burned gold and crimson, colors stretching across the horizon like the fading embers of a dying fire. Shadows lengthened, the air cooled, and the valley settled. Aaron sat beside Valira, not at a distance, not cautiously, but near, close enough to feel the heat of her body, close enough to hear the slow rhythm of her breath. He leaned back against a stone, exhaustion pulling at his limbs. The day had been long, like all the others. He looked up at the sky. "You could leave," he said. The words were simple, unadorned. "When you're strong enough." Valira did not respond. Her massive head rested against the earth, eyes half-lidded, her breathing steady. She did not move, did not acknowledge the suggestion. But she had heard. Aaron smiled faintly. "Yes," he murmured. "I figured." Because he understood something now. This was not about escape. This was about choice. And she, like him, had already made hers. Above them, the first stars appeared. Faint at first, then brighter. The sky deepened. The world quieted. And the valley was silent, but not with fear, not with dread, not with the suffocating weight of what might come. This silence was different. It was calm. It was steady. It was peace. Far beyond the mountains, word began to spread, not as rumors, not as fear, but as something far stranger. Hope. They spoke of a valley where a dragon still lived, of an army that had come to destroy, and left without striking a blow. They spoke of a people who had chosen fear, and then chosen differently. But most of all, they spoke of one truth. Not of armies, not of power, not of magic or might, but of a single moment, a single choice. When everyone stepped away, one human stepped forward, and in doing so, changed everything.